Welcome to today's deep dive. We're thrilled to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
So today, our mission is to extract a surprisingly profound nugget of knowledge from a very brief, hyper-focused look at a totally everyday object.
Right, an object most people probably walk right past.
Exactly. We are looking at a piece of gray plastic that costs like 20 cents. It sits in the completely wrong aisle of the hardware store, and yet it flawlessly executes the laws of physics to solve one of the most infuriating backyard chores on Earth.
I mean, it sounds almost absurd when you frame it that way.
It really does.
But there is a profound truth hiding in this extremely mundane little object. You know, we spend so much of our time analyzing high-tech innovations.
Yeah, software, smart devices, all that.
Right, complex engineering.
Yeah.
And we just completely overlook the elegance of pure, simple mechanics. We're talking about the mechanics, the utility, and the surprising value of a hose guide or a hose roller.
And let's be honest here, pulling a garden hose is the absolute definition of a mundane, physically infuriating chore.
Oh, for sure.
You grab the nozzle, you start walking confidently across the lawn, and suddenly, yank.
Yep. You stop dead in your tracks.
You pull harder, the hose catches on a brick corner, it folds completely in half, the water pressure dies to a trickle.
And you are just standing there fighting a losing battle against a rubber tube.
Exactly. It's this universal experience of sudden, unexpected resistance.
And what's wild is that most of us just accept it, you know?
Uh-huh.
We assume that a certain amount of physical struggle is just a built-in feature of yard work.
Like it's a mandatory workout.
Right. We let the hose dictate our movements instead of the other way around.
Yeah.
But then you step into the world of mechanical efficiency and you realize that this backyard tug of war is completely optional.
It is the absolute definition of a hidden gem. This tiny intervention requires almost zero effort to install, but it fundamentally alters the physics of your space.
Yeah, it really does.
So we're going to explore how this incredibly cheap piece of hardware changes your environment. But honestly, the story of how this specific hose guide was found is almost as interesting as the tool itself.
Oh, the context of the discovery is crucial. It tells us so much about the blind spots we all have when we're trying to solve problems.
Okay, let's unpack this. According to the source material, the discovery of this specific hose roller didn't happen in the gardening center.
Nope.
It didn't happen in a specialized irrigation or landscaping shop either. The discovery actually happened in the plumbing section of a store.
Right. Well, the original mission, the whole reason the person was in the store in the first place was to pick up fish supplies for an aquarium.
Fish supplies, which highlights a fascinating cognitive bias known as functional fixedness.
Yes. Human beings, and, well, by extension, retail environments, tend to categorize the world into very strict silos based on a product's intended end use rather than its underlying mechanical function.
We label the aisles based on the room of the house. We have things for the yard, things for the bathroom, and things for the fish tank.
Exactly. And our brains follow those signs perfectly.
Yeah.
If we have a problem in the garden, we only look in the garden aisle. But mechanical principles absolutely do not care about retail labels. The laws of physics don't care if water is flowing into a glass-free tank, through a copper bathroom pipe, or out onto a Bermuda grass lawn.
Managing the flow of water, routing flexible tubing around corners, reducing wear and tear, these are just universal mechanical challenges.
They are. So the problem of a hose getting stuck isn't actually a gardening problem at all.
No, it is strictly a fluid dynamics and friction problem.
That is the conceptual leap right there. The source's discovery highlights the incredible value of maintaining an observant, cross-disciplinary mindset when you're problem-solving.
A plumber's solution to routing a PVC pipe might be the exact mechanical fix you need for routing your garden hose.
But you will never find it if you refuse to leave the garden center.
It's exactly like when you go to the grocery store because you desperately need milk, but you wander down the seasonal aisle and stumble upon a brilliantly designed plastic tote that perfectly solves an organizational nightmare you've been having in your garage.
Right, you weren't looking for a garage solution.
But because your eyes were open to the function of the object rather than its location, the solution just presented itself.
Cross-pollination of ideas happens the moment you stop looking at the label on the box and start analyzing the geometry of the mechanism inside it.
Which brings us to the mechanism itself. We need to zoom in on the actual anatomy of this device to understand what it is and why it works so flawlessly.
Yeah, let's look at the physical design.
So according to our source, this tool is designed to be used in tandem with a water hose reel system. It mounts onto a solid surface, like a wall or a post.
And the hose is fed specifically through the center of 4 gray rollers.
Its primary physical purpose is to manage the hose's direction and to radically reduce friction while pulling and winding.
It really is a masterclass in applying physics to domestic life. You take a bracket, mount it at a strategic choke point, and let the rollers do the heavy lifting.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, and I actually want to push back on this design for a second.
Okay, go for it.
The source specifically highlights that there are 4 gray rollers. Why 4?
That's a great question.
If the goal is just to guide a hose and give it a smooth surface to pass through, why go through the engineering trouble of installing 4 distinct moving parts?
Right, especially outdoors.
Yeah. A garden is a dirty environment. Moving parts mean axles that can rust, get jammed with mud, or just break. Wouldn't a simple, smooth plastic ring or like a solid curved hook be infinitely more reliable?
That is a very logical assumption, but it ignores the brutal reality of kinetic friction. What's fascinating here is the underlying geometry of human movement.
Okay, how so?
If you just use a solid, smooth plastic ring or a static hook, you haven't actually eliminated friction at all. You've merely changed the surface material.
But pulling a rubber hose across smooth plastic has to be easier than dragging it across a jagged brick wall, right? It's just a smoother type of dragging.
It is smoother dragging, but it can actually be worse in certain conditions.
Wait, really? Worse?
Yeah, when you pull a heavy wet rubber hose through a static plastic ring, the wet rubber can actually create a microscopic suction effect against the smooth plastic.
Oh, wow. I didn't think of that.
It generates heat, it causes localized wear on the hose casing, and crucially, it still requires a significant amount of sheer physical force from you to overcome that drag. You are still fighting the material.
So the smooth ring is a false economy. It looks like a solution, but mechanically, it's still just a bottleneck.
Exactly. The four-roller design actively addresses the root cause of the problem by changing the physics of the interaction.
Okay.
By feeding the hose through the center of 4 rotating cylinders, arranged in a square or a cross formation, you are creating what engineers call a dynamic bounding box.
A dynamic bounding box. Okay, I'm picturing a square where every wall is a treadmill.
That is the brilliant way to visualize it.
So basically, no matter how badly I wander off course, the box creates a spinning wall that catches my mistake and corrects the angle.
Yes. Think about how you actually behave when you water a yard. You don't pull the hose perfectly straight out, parallel to the ground, in a robotic line.
Definitely not.
You wander. You walk to the left to hit the flower bed. You walk to the right to watch the car. You pull it aggressively upwards to water a hanging basket on the porch, and then drop it downwards to rinse the pavement.
You're wandering all over the yard. The angle is just a chaotic mess.
And that is the genius of the four rollers. No matter which direction you pull the hose, up, down, left, right, or any extreme diagonal in between the hose will press against at least one and usually 2 of those rollers.
And then they just spin.
Exactly. The split second the rubber makes contact, the roller spins on its axis. It instantly converts dragging kinetic friction into rolling friction.
Which requires drastically less energy to overcome.
Exponentially less energy. Rolling friction is a tiny fraction of kinetic dragging friction.
Okay, but what about the dirt and mud I mentioned earlier, jamming the moving parts?
Right, you're concerned about the garden environment. Well, these aren't high-precision aerospace bearings. The genius of cheap, functional design is that the gap tolerances on these gray rollers are actually quite loose.
Oh, so they don't get stuck.
No. If mud gets in there, the loose tolerance allows the dirt to just fall right back out as it spins, whereas a tight, expensive metal bearing would immediately seize up in that environment.
That makes perfect sense.
Hmm.
The system automatically adapts to spin with you rather than drag against you, regardless of the conditions.
Precisely.
So we've solved the physics of pulling the hose. The rolling friction nullifies the effort. So what does this all mean for the yard itself? What happens to all that kinetic energy that's no longer scraping off the side of my house?
The environmental impact is arguably the most important part of this whole setup. It acts as an intermediary between the chaos of the user's movements and the organization of the yard.
Right. Our source notes that this guide allows the hose to glide smoothly around corners without kinking. It prevents the hose from rubbing against sharp edges, and it keeps it from destroying plants.
It's a lifesaver for landscaping.
If I can offer an analogy, trying to manage a 100-foot hose without a guide is a lot like trying to walk a very large, incredibly stubborn dog on a long leash.
Oh, I think anyone who has spent a Saturday doing yard work is visualizing that exact struggle right now.
You pull the leash, and the dog or the hose just blindly drags behind you, taking the path of most resistance.
Right, it cuts corners.
It plows straight through your delicate tulip beds, snapping the stems. It gets caught around the sharp stucco corner of your garage, and instead of following your path, the leash just pulls taut.
Scraping violently against the wall until it gets wedged under a rock.
Exactly. You are constantly fighting the destructive, blind trajectory of the drag.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, placing this hose guide at a strategic corner fundamentally alters that destructive trajectory.
Right.
It creates a defined, immovable pivot point.
Okay.
And by doing so, you are instituting a highly effective dual protection system.
A dual protection system. I assume you mean we aren't just protecting the flowers from being decapitated, but we're actually protecting the hose itself from getting shredded on the masonry.
Precisely. The first layer of protection is for the delicate environment. As your stubborn dog analogy illustrates, a heavy, water-filled hose dragged laterally across a lawn acts like a blunt scythe.
Yeah, it'll take out anything in its path.
The guide forces the hose to follow a strictly defined geometric path, neutralizing the lateral pulling force and keeping your landscaping entirely safe from being crushed.
The plants survived the weekend.
The plants survive. But the second layer of protection is just as vital, protecting the tool from the environment. Garden hoses are durable, but their outer casings are not invincible.
No, they definitely wear out.
Dragging a pressurized vinyl or rubber hose repeatedly across a sharp brick planter creates microabrasions. Over time, those abrasions deepen. The structural integrity weakens, and eventually the hose blows out and punctures.
But with the guide.
The guide ensures the hose only ever touches smooth, spinning gray plastic. It extends the life of the hose indefinitely by entirely preventing that environmental wear and tear.
And it also prevents kinking, which, mechanically speaking, is just a localized failure of the hose, right? It's what happens when acute tension meets a sharp angle.
Yes, a kink stops the flow of water because the material folds inward on itself. The four-roller guide enforces a gentle, sweeping curve. It physically prevents the hose from achieving the sharp geometric angle required to form a kink.
But we can't ignore the final and perhaps most physically demanding point the source makes. It makes reeling the heavy hose back to the main drum significantly easier.
Oh, absolutely.
We put so much focus on pulling the hose out to water the plants, we completely forget that the hardest physical labor is the cleanup at the end of the chore.
The retraction is where most people actually injure their backs or break their equipment. You are tired, the job is done,
Yeah.
and now you have to manually crank a wheel to retract 100 feet of hose that is full of heavy water, dragging across wet grass and concrete.
Let's break down how that retraction actually damages the main drum without a guide. Because if you don't have this pivot point, you're essentially trying to pull that dead weight around every obstacle in the yard using only the mechanical torque of the reel's crank handle.
Which is an engineering nightmare for the reel. If you pull a hose from an extreme side angle without a guide, the hose doesn't spool evenly across the drum. It stacks up heavily on one side of the reel.
Oh, I hate when that happens.
It builds up, jams against the plastic housing, and suddenly the crank won't turn. You have to stop, walk over, manually pull the jammed hose out, and try to guide it evenly with your hands while cranking.
It's the worst.
Furthermore, the sheer torque required to drag a water-filled hose around a brick corner puts immense strain on the internal plastic gears of the reel. That is exactly how handles snap and internal mechanisms strip out.
So the guide acts as a forced alignment tool.
It acts as a perfect level winder. The reduction of friction that the four rollers provide on the way out pays massive dividends in energy conservation on the way back in.
Because it's perfectly lined up.
Exactly. Because the guide aligns the hose perfectly straight with the main drum, every single turn of the crank handle is pure, efficient retraction. You aren't fighting the geometry of the yard, you are just smoothly rolling a cylinder.
It transforms the chore from a chaotic physical struggle into a smooth mechanical operation. Which brings us to the absolute crescendo of this deep dive.
Yes, the cost.
We have spent all this time analyzing the mechanics of kinetic friction, the brilliant geometry of the dynamic bounding box, the dual protection of the landscape and the equipment, and the massive conservation of human energy during retraction.
It is an incredibly high-utility device that solves a cascade of physical problems. It is a flawless mechanical intervention.
Now, we have to weigh all of that profound utility against the exact cost of the item as revealed by our source. The cost of this hose guide, this miracle of 4 spinning gray rollers that saves your back, saves your hose, and saves your plants, is a mere 1 Malaysian ringgit, MYR1.
Which, in terms of global currency conversion, is roughly 20 US cents.
20 cents.
It is effectively pocket change. It is closer to being free than it is to being an actual purchase.
We live in a world where we are constantly being aggressively marketed to with incredibly expensive, high-tech, or massively over-engineered solutions to everyday problems.
We really are.
We buy smart valves with Wi-Fi for our sprinklers. We buy motorized automatic hose retractors that cost hundreds of dollars and have literal computer motherboards inside them. How often do we completely overlook the simplest, cheapest mechanical fix? Do you think there is an inherent psychological bias against a 1 ringgit tool being genuinely effective?
This raises an important question about how we perceive value in a hyper-consumerist society. You are entirely correct about the bias. In modern culture, we have been trained to conflate complexity with effectiveness, and we heavily conflate high cost with high quality.
If it's cheap, our brains tell us it must be disposable junk. If it's purely mechanical, we assume it must be outdated technology.
We assume that a frustrating, physically demanding chore like managing a heavy garden hose simply must require a $200 motorized solution with a lithium-ion battery.
Right.
But what happens when that complex retractor motor burns out or the Bluetooth chip fails? The whole expensive unit becomes garbage. The 1 ringgit hose guide proves that true engineering beauty isn't always about adding complexity. It isn't about adding motors, sensors, or apps.
It's about respecting physics.
It is about perfectly matching a tool to the specific parameters of a problem. The actual problem in the yard isn't that winding a hose lacks a microchip. The problem is kinetic friction and poor routing angles.
And the undisputed solution to kinetic friction is rolling friction.
Exactly. 4 gray plastic rollers achieve that solution perfectly, and they will continue to achieve it for decades because there is almost nothing in the mechanism complex enough to break.
It is the ultimate elegance of cheap, highly functional design. A 20-cent investment that actively reduces your daily physical frustration, prevents expensive blowout damage to your hose, and protects the delicate ecosystem of your garden.
Mathematically speaking, it represents an almost infinite return on a microscopic investment.
It completely inverts the modern narrative that you have to pay a massive premium to achieve a better quality of life.
Sometimes a massively better quality of life is sitting on a dusty shelf in the plumbing aisle, masquerading as a 1 ringgit piece of plastic, just waiting for you to walk by while you're busy looking for aquarium filters.
It is a powerful testament to keeping your eyes open, ignoring the labels on the aisles, and looking at the mechanics of the world around you.
It truly is.
And that perfectly encapsulates the journey we've been on today. We started with a completely serendipitous detour, a mundane trip for fish supplies that wandered into the plumbing section and uncovered a universal mechanical truth.
We unpacked a masterclass in friction reduction through the simple, brilliant geometry of a dynamic bounding box made of 4 gray rollers.
We explored the ripple effect of how those rollers protect both the equipment and the environment, acting as a perfect pivot point for retraction. And finally, we confronted our own deep-seated biases about value, realizing that absolute mechanical perfection doesn't require a microchip, and it can cost as little as 20 cents.
The best solutions are almost always the most fundamental ones.
And that leaves us with a thought I want you, the listener, to carry with you today. Think about your own daily routines. Think about the processes you use at your desk at work or the physical chores you do around your home.
Where is the sharp edge or the kink in your workflow?
Exactly. Where are you blindly dragging a heavy burden and fighting against unnecessary friction, just assuming that the physical or mental struggle is an unavoidable part of the job?
We all have those rigid blind spots in our daily routines where we just accept the friction.
We absolutely do. And more importantly, once you identify that point of friction in your own life, ask yourself a question. What is the conceptual equivalent of a 1 ringgit set of 4 gray rollers that could instantly smooth out that drag?
What simple, perfectly matched, purely functional tool or process are you actively overlooking because it seems too basic, too cheap, or sits in the wrong aisle of your life to possibly work?
The exact solution you need might be sitting in a category you haven't even thought to explore yet. So keep your eyes open, ignore the labels, keep questioning the friction in your life.
Always.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We love unpacking these hidden, everyday gems with you. Keep learning, keep looking incredibly closely at the mundane details of the world around you, and remember, you really don't have to keep dragging that stubborn hose. Have a fantastic day, everyone.